The United Nations peacekeeping forces, aka the deep state's wannabe global military, are becoming infamous around the world, but not for keeping the peace, but rather for raping children and slaughtering innocent civilians. True story. Stay tuned, and I'll tell you more. Hey, I'm Alex Newman, and this is Behind the Deep State. So, the New World Order, since rebranded as the Liberal World Order, obviously cannot be imposed on humanity without the use of military force. There's still all those bitter clingers clinging to their guns and their Bibles and their countries and all that. The Deep State swamp realizes this. Don't believe me? Watch Ultimate Swamp Creature, the late George H.W. Bush, Mr. 1,000 Points of Light. Check this out.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
When we are successful, and we will be. But did you notice what he said? We're going to have to rely on the UN's peacekeeping role, by which they mean the UN's war-making role. So let's talk about the UN's peacekeeping troops, the infamous blue helmets, which I'm told would make fantastic targets, obviously if they weren't on a person's head. And I'll start off with a caveat. You know, I know a lot of people who work in the UN, and they're decent people, and I'm sure there are plenty of decent people among the UN's so-called peace troops. But I want to talk about what's been going on with these so-called peace troops. Let's start with the nonprofit group Hear Their Cries. I actually know some of the people who run it. It's former UN officials. And they have estimated that there have been about 60,000 victims of rape and sexual abuse. Children, we're talking about, women and children, by these UN officials, by these international peace troops and aid workers just in the last decade. Okay, just in the last 10 years. Think about that. 60,000 women and children raped by these monsters in a decade. Okay, and thanks to diplomatic immunity, I call it diplomatic impunity, almost none of these monsters have been punished for doing one of the worst crimes imaginable, harming little children. Instead, the UN actually terrorizes the whistleblowers who try to expose and stop the rape and the pedophilia and the abuse of children. True story. Let's look at Anders Kompass. He was a senior UN human rights official based in Geneva, and he found out that UN troops in the Central African Republic, where they were supposedly keeping the peace, were raping children systematically, and not just in the CAR, but also in other places. Well, when he reported this to his superiors, they were not very concerned. So, doing the right thing, he actually went to prosecutors in France and said, look, guys, the UN's troops are raping children in the Central African Republic. You've got to stop it. Well, the UN did not respond by giving him a medal. Instead, they escorted him out of his office under armed guard. They investigated him. They humiliated him. They demonized him in the press. They had a secret meeting. All the UN's top officials came together at a secret meeting in Turin, and they basically made his life a living hell. It got so bad that Kompass could no longer stay there. He finally resigned. And actually, in a statement where he explained this situation and what had happened, he said he was skeptical that ethics could ever return to the United Nations. He slammed the impunity that permeates that global body. I would quibble with that. I would question whether there ever were ethics at the United Nations. But all right, give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there were at one point. Now, I actually interviewed one of the highest level UN officials about this on the record. Most of the UN people I talk to have to go off the record because the New American is, shall we say, very unpopular in UN circles because they don't like being exposed. They know most of the press are sycophants, and we actually do real reporting and we expose evil. But I went on record with UN Undersecretary General Inga-Britt Ahlenius, a wonderful, wonderful Swedish lady. She used to run the UN Office of Internal Oversight Services, the OIOS. This is basically the UN's main investigative arm. And what she told me was that I think, and this is a direct quote, I think any decent person should resign after the disclosure of the collusion that they participated in or silently accepted. She was referring, of course, to the Turin gang that got together in Turin in Italy to plot the destruction of Anders Kompass for exposing UN child rapists. She actually described Kompass as the only person, he was also Swedish, but I'm sure that's not the reason why Olenius was so fond of him. But she said that he was the only person that has acted professionally and morally correct, in my view. She is absolutely correct. Andres Campos was probably the only official in this entire bureaucracy who did the right thing. And he was, of course, the only official who got punished. Not the child rapist. We don't punish the child rapist, the sickos who ruin the lives of these children. We punish the guy who tries to stop it. Okay, let that sink in, folks. Now, Olenius continues. She said the culture at the UN under Ban Ki-moon has decayed to the point that these senior UN officials in turn don't even realize how ridiculous this looks to the rest of the world. She says these people were colluding against Compass, and these are the supreme authorities at the UN, and yet they don't seem to recognize or understand what would happen if this surfaces. The problem for the UN in this case is that it surfaced and the public found out about it. Let that sink in, folks. The leadership of the United Nations was more concerned about getting busted for their disgustingness than they were about stopping the rape of innocent children. You trust these people to keep the peace? Give me a break. Okay. She went on to say the Central African Republic affair is a sign that shows how accountability will actually have to be demanded from the UN. It will not come on its own. Now, guys, we are just scratching the surface. I've been reporting on this stuff for over a decade. It makes me want to puke. It is absolutely disgusting. And I say this as somebody who grew up kind of in the whole globalist international milieu where, we all love globalism and we all love the UN. It's enough to make you want to barf. I'm just going to give you a handful of samples. In 2010, we got a U.S. diplomatic cable. It was released by WikiLeaks. And what it showed was that the UN's peace troops were coercing underage girls to have sex in exchange for food and other essentials that American taxpayers paid for in the Ivory Coast. If you want to know how bad this problem got, the nonprofit group Save the Children, they did a survey of little girls in the Ivorian town of Tulepolo, and what they found was that 4 out of 5, 8 out of 10 underage girls were being regularly raped by UN troops. Imagine if that was your daughter or your sister. Okay, these are sick, sick individuals. None of them were punished. In an interview about this disgusting perversion, a UN spokesman did admit that, the commanders failed to maintain an environment that prevents sexual exploitation and abuse. But, of course, he did not say we're not going to do anything about it. He just didn't do anything about it. Now, in 2011, after they had finished slaughtering protesters in Haiti, UN troops actually held down and gang raped a little boy on camera. The only reason it became an international scandal is because they couldn't hide it because it was on tape. The president of Haiti at that time, Michel Martelly, described this as the collective rape carried out against a young Haitian boy. Again, these people are sick. The UN deputy envoy to Haiti, Nigel Fisher, instead of worrying about the poor child who was raped, he says, we know that while there is justifiable outrage, there are also some who would use this for political ends. Oh, boo-hoo. Someone's going to make the UN look bad because you're raping children, you sick freaks. Sorry, I got to control myself here. Izili Danto, a lady who I've interviewed before, wonderful, wonderful lady, the president of the Haitian Lawyers Leadership Network. She said in 2007, it was discovered and reported that girls as young as 13 were being raped by UN peacekeepers. They were being paid by as little as $1. Okay. She said Sri Lankan soldiers were accused of systematically raping Haitian women and girls, some as young as 7 years old, folks. Can you get any sicker than that? In 2017, the Associated Press reported on 2,000 allegations of rape, pedophilia, and sexual abuse of innocent civilians by UN peace troops. Obviously, the overwhelming majority of these rapes and child abuse go unreported, as the UN itself admits. In 2004, after an investigation into the pedophilia and rape of children and human trafficking by UN forces in Africa, even the head of the UN, former UN chief Kofi Annan, was forced to admit that there were serious problems. He said, I'm afraid there is clear evidence that acts of gross misconduct have taken place. Yeah, okay. That's like one way to put it, I suppose. And this has come out in the press. In 2006, an investigation by the BBC found that children have been subjected to rape and prostitution by United Nations peacekeepers in Haiti and Liberia. Okay, one of the really gross ones that I came across, this was a report by investigative journalist Kathy Claridge. She outlined the most grotesque abuse you can imagine. These UN so-called peace troops kidnapped a mentally handicapped young boy. They started when he was 8 years old, and they raped him brutally for 5 years. These were UN so-called peace troops from Pakistan. When it was reported to the Pakistani UN commander, instead of reporting it to the UN mission and going after the child rapist, the commander decided, quote, to handle it himself. So the UN officer actually was just hoping this would go away because he was also abusing the child. And this UN squad then hired a kidnapper to kidnap the boy and hide him from the people investigating. One 15-year-old boy that they interviewed, they called him V09 to conceal his identity. He was raped by over 100 UN peace troops, okay? V04, a 14-year-old girl, was raped every single day by a UN soldier. V02, victim 2, was repeatedly raped by a UN commander. Another victim, who was 16 at the time, was lured into a UN compound by a UN soldier using bread and peanut butter. Once she was inside, the UN soldier stuck a gun at her and made her pregnant after raping her. Okay, and it's not just UN peace troops that are raping children. In 1987, the New York Times reported that the UN committee members, part of UNICEF, they were arrested for operating a child pornography studio in the basement of the UNICEF building in Brussels. Okay, why does this come up over and over and over again? And then the UN says, oh, we're very concerned about this. We totally frown upon the rape of children, and we promise we're going to look into it and maybe, make a statement. Well, that's what they say. Then we had the recent head of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, who likes to call the UN the Parliament of Humanity, who just sent our fake president-elect a congratulations note. He was in America. He was celebrating the illegal Supreme Court decision where they claimed that you had a right to a homosexual marriage, and he openly praised a child rapist by the name of Harvey Milk. He said, oh, this guy sparked the America's gay rights revolution. Okay, so while UN troops are raping children around the world, the head of the UN is in San Francisco showering praises on a child rapist. Some of the victims of this disgusting child rapist actually committed suicide. They were so harmed and scarred by this abuse. Now, it's not just raping children, although they do that a lot. They also have a tendency to slaughter civilians, the supposed civilians they're keeping safe and protecting and bringing peace to. So in 2009 and 2010, we had UN-backed troops in Somalia and the Congo, raping women and children, burning down villages, slaughtering civilians, and other horrifying atrocities. In 2015, we had UN troops in Mali. Civilians were protesting the occupation of their country by a bunch of child-raping perverts, and the UN troops responded by slaughtering unarmed protesters, according to witnesses and international reports, and even a UN spokesman admitted it happened. In early 2013, UN military forces in Mali were also involved in summary executions and mass human rights abuses directed at the civilian population of that country. In 2011, another tragedy of immense proportions. The elected Christian president of that nation, Mr. Gbagbo of Ivory Coast, was overthrown by brutal UN-backed jihadists. They literally butchered thousands of innocent Christians with machetes. They burned down churches filled with Christians cowering inside so they could install their totalitarian Muslim central banker ally. And this was after Gbagbo won the election and the Ivorian Supreme Court ruled that the Gbagbo, the Christian, won the election. Imagine if the Supreme Court decided that Donald Trump was the president and the UN sent their troops in and they started backing militias and they started slaughtering Christians with machetes. And you get a sense of what happened in the Ivory Coast. Now, this evil has been going on almost from the beginning of the UN. Okay, one of their first major peace missions was in the province of Katanga. You had a situation in the Congo where there was a mass-murdering communist-backed dictator, Patrice Lumumba, in the Congo, and the people of Katanga decided, actually, we don't want to live under a mass-murdering communist-backed dictator. I recommend you watch it. You can find the link for it right here. What happened was the dictator, the Soviet-backed mass-murdering dictator, invited the UN troops to come in and absolutely decimate the people of Katanga under the leadership of Moise Tshombe, a freedom-loving, pro-Western, wonderful African leader. He declared independence with the total support of his people. He was actually in correspondence with my late friend Sam Blumenfeld, who I co-wrote the book Crimes of the Educators with. We've still got his correspondence with Moise Tshombe. So the UN decided that, no, the people of Katanga Katanga must live under the mass-murdering Soviet-backed dictator, so they sent in their peace troops to absolutely brutalize the people of Katanga. They started bombing hospitals. They started raping women and children. They bayoneted little children. Okay, they bayoneted 9-year-old boys, and they bombed hospitals, and they fired on civilian cars as they were trying to flee this insanity. Brought to you courtesy of U.S. taxpayer dollars by the UN's peace troops. Okay, that was back in 1960. So they've been at this for a very long time. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's ignorance or malice, but there are people right in this country right now who want these child-raping monsters to come into the United States. Under the guise of stopping gun violence, County Commissioner Richard Boykin in Cook County, Illinois, which is where Chicago is, literally went to UN headquarters in New York City to ask that the UN deploy peacekeeping troops in Chicago to disarm American citizens. True story. So we're going to handcuff our police and tell them they're not allowed to do anything to criminals, and then we're going to invite the UN's mass murdering, child raping peace troops in to disarm our citizens. Get out of here, okay? Ironically, after the UN helped the mass-murdering dictator of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, disarm the population, crime, murder, and tyranny exploded in Venezuela. Is anyone surprised? They now have one of the highest murder rates and one of the most totalitarian governments on planet Earth. Thanks, UN. Good job. We also have subversive members of our Congress. I will not mention their names, but you all know who they are, who have openly said they want the UN to take charge of our southern border. That way more of their little buddies can come on in here and help elect more radicals to Congress. So American lawmakers know all about these perverts and child rapists and murderers in UN outfits. I've sat in committee hearings in Washington, D.C., in Congress, where this was discussed openly with UN whistleblowers. I've talked to members of Congress about it. Multiple members of Congress. They know. Okay, even the globalist members of Congress who love the UN, right? U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman, former U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Corker, total globalist, fake Republican. He said that if UN troops were on their way to America, he would be on the first flight home to protect his family. That would be a good idea, folks. I won't say it explicitly, but if you ever see blue helmets in your neighborhood, you had better look out for your loved ones, okay? They will do the same thing to you as they've done to the people of Haiti and Liberia and the Ivory Coast and Mali and Congo and Somalia and Southeast Asia, and on the list goes. They even did this in Europe. During the Balkan War, the UN was exposed kidnapping children and selling them into sex slavery, okay? And yet, despite all of this barbarism, despite all of this absolute savagery, the funding keeps flowing from our Congress. And in 2014, the Obama administration joined forces with the UN and dozens of other UN member governments in promising to strengthen the UN's so-called peacekeeping schemes. Talk about idiocy. Now, the deep state has said, oh, look, the UN's troops are raping children everywhere. I know, let's give the UN more power. Can you believe it? The nerve of these people, the chutzpah. Okay, the Council on Foreign Relations has a global governance director. His name is Stuart Patrick, and he grotesquely proposed that we give the UN even more power as a solution to this crisis. He said, oh, let's let the UN set up their own court system so that they can hold these child rapists accountable. If you think the UN's going to hold the child rapists accountable, you're probably watching the wrong channel, and you're probably not paying much attention, and you probably did not learn much critical thinking. Okay, more power is a terrible idea. You cannot reform the UN. It is an abomination. I call it the UN abominations, right? Instead of the United Nations, the United Abominations. So you're getting poison fruit because it's coming from a poison tree because it came from a poison seed. Go back and watch our episode from a few weeks ago on the UN and how the purpose has always been to turn this monstrosity into a global government. The real solution, folks, is going to be to get us out of the United Nations. It would set the deep state back decades. There is a bill in Congress right now, H.R. 204, to get us out of the United States, or get us out of the United Nations, sorry. It's called the American Sovereignty Restoration Act. Listen to Congressman Thomas Massey, one of the sponsors, talking about it when we interviewed him recently.
On Facebook, I revived this bill that I'm a co-sponsor of to get us out of the United Nations, and I used the hashtag AmExit and UNExit. And both of those, and that post caught on pretty well, and it renewed interest in a bill that actually was introduced by Ron Paul many years ago, and a congressman before that. And the reason that I think we need to get out of the UN is, well, it's full of dictators, and it's also something that I don't think our sovereign government should defer to. For instance, a lot of these foreign relations bills that come in front of us in Congress in the whereas clauses, they might say, whereas the UN has said this or the UN decided this, now therefore be it resolved. Well, that's almost an automatic no for me, because why would I defer to the United Nations if we're a sovereign country? The best thing you can say about the United Nations is it's mostly ineffective and a waste of money. Like, that's the best thing you could say about it. So I'm glad that they're somewhat ineffective, but I don't like that we waste the money. We provide like 90% of the funding for the United Nations for their activities overseas, their intervention and whatnot. And so, you know, the other countries who are in there, they don't pay their fair share, but a fair share would be zero, and we should get out.
Guys, we have a real problem on our hands. When you think UN peacekeeping troops, don't think peace, okay? They're not about peace. It's the most Orwellian phrase ever, right? It's like the ultimate example of doublespeak. Peacekeeping troops are actually war-making troops. They're here to enslave and to steal and to kill and destroy. So when you think UN peacekeeping troops, think UN war-making, child-raping, New World Order enforcing deep state gangsters who are a threat to you and your family and your life and your liberty and your country. It's time to get us out of the United Nations and give the deep state a black eye that they might never recover from. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe, hit like, hit that little bell so that you'll be notified whenever we post new videos. And also, please make sure to share this video with your friends. Email's a great way to do it. Remember, there are powerful forces working to steal our freedom and destroy our country. We need to work together, expose those behind the deep state. Otherwise, you can kiss your liberties goodbye. I call it the UN abominations, right? Instead of the United Nations, the United Abominations.